Hello everyone. Meet the Maker today is with Stuart Wilkie in his studio at Farfield Mill. Hello Stuart, and thanks for inviting us here.
Well, thank you for coming, and you've picked a very beautiful day here. The sun is shining outside on the beautiful view, which outside my window I can see the Howgills. Always a source of inspiration, and the ideal place for my studio. I've been here for about 4 years now, and my main interest is I'm a relief printmaker, and I work with wood engraving and liner printing. And the wood engraving is something I particularly enjoy using, and this is pretty much an English form of printmaking. And many of you would have heard of Thomas Bewick, who perfected this process. And he was alive in 1753 and died in 1828. And in that time produced a vast amount of wonderful prints, which then ended up in what became very popular books on birds, quadrupeds. And amazingly, his prints, his blocks that he created, still produce passable prints.
That's amazing. So, I would imagine for lino print, the lifespan of the piece of lino is relatively short, but wood blocks will last forever.
Well, if they're carved on the right material. So the thing about wood engraving is there are only a few woods that are really suitable. Wood engraving is the end engraving. So imagine this is your piece of boxwood, which is a very hard, slow-growing kind of wood. And what we do is we cut through that way rather than planks. And it's the end, which is then the source of the material we carve on. And we produce a very fine, a very smooth surface by polishing that surface with very fine sandpaper. It has to be also very level. And then that becomes the block we carve the images onto.
Is it just sanded, or do you treat it with any kind of varnish before you start?
No varnish. I tend to make my own blocks. It's really difficult to make a good block. It has to be consistent. And all wood growth tells a story, especially English boxwood. Most of my boxwood comes from Cumbria, and our climate isn't always consistent. And we get lots of defects and we have to work around that. But that's part of the joy of working with this material, because one tries to use the most of the shape you get and try and cope with the little imperfections that exist in a piece of wood. And when you look at a piece of boxwood like this, you start to think, what can I turn that into?
How did you develop your own skills in this?
Well, that was interesting. So I have to say, I was always interested in creating art. And one day on a wet day, I had to take cover in a bookshop, a second-hand bookshop, and I found a book. I paid £10 for it, and it's created by this wonderful printmaker of the 1930s called Claire Leighton. And in this book, which is printed on old paper, she tells you exactly what to do. And she made a very good comment at the beginning of the book. She said, of all media, wood engraving is the one in which there's the least to be taught and then most to be learned. And that's so true. So basically, it got me started. I got some tools and just got going with it. And it's that process of, I am self-taught when it comes to this medium. But having said that, I get a lot of inspiration from some of the great printmakers of the past. And I particularly like Claire. Another great printmaker was a wildlife artist called Charles Tunnicliffe. And again, his books are beautifully illustrated with wonderful wood engravings. And I just feel his work is just brilliant. And again, largely in the 1940s and 50s, he was creating these wonderful wood engravings, which, you know, if he was around now, I'd really like to pick his brains on this, but I can still see the images and they can give me an idea of what's going on.
What I see most about this work is the real incredible attention to fine detail.
Yes, I mean, that's the thing about, compared with wood block, which tends to be cruder. Although the Japanese were fantastic practitioners of wood block printing, a lot of the European wood block printing tends to be slightly rougher, cruder kind of work, which can lend itself to.
Can you explain the difference between wood block and?
Yeah, so basically, with wood block, you're cutting onto the long grain of the wood, and that means some of the grain will influence the image that you create. And you tend to have a black line. You cut each side and then leave the line that then becomes printed. Wood engraving is like drawing with a white line. So we're using everything we cut away is going to be basically white or the colour of paper. And
so when you have a photo, do you put any kind of like a tracing image onto the wood, or do you do it freehand just from looking at the sketch and the drawing?
Yes, I mean, one thing you have to bear in mind is all printmaking is the mirror image.
Oh yes.
So I take for example, so here's an example of a field sketch. So this is a local scene when they're cutting the hay and defining the contours on the landscape. And I did it in colour because it's much quicker as a medium. Also, watercolour's quick. But then I've had to reverse the image and then carve it onto a block, and then that became that wood engraving there.
That's just fabulous.
Modern equipment helps a bit because I can take my iPad, photograph that image and flip it on the iPad and then redraw it. I tend to prefer to redraw rather than trace. And the reason I prefer to do that is because you're not trying to produce an absolute copy of what you've already created in your sketchbook. You're trying to reinterpret it. And I think if you slavishly adhere to a traced image, then it's a bit rigid and sometimes loses spontaneity and the picture becomes dull. So possible I would redraw it, but not in incredible detail, just the main outline and then work on that image.
I see that a lot of the images you take are also of wildlife.
Yes, that's more tricky. The summer wildlife is obliging and it will let you do field sketches. Birds, 3-second rule, on the whole, they're moving in 3 seconds. And then I will use my own reference photographs, which I've taken, and draw a lot of information from that because they are such a rapid moving target. It's hard to get a sketch down. But obviously landscape is more forgiving. But even landscapes change quite quickly. The light can change, the clouds can come through. So we use these little tiny engraving tools. This is an ancient tool. And this one's called a spit sticker. They've got these lovely names. I think it's German for point. Anyway, it's got curved sides. I don't know if you can see that in the image. But that tool allows you to carve both nice curves, but also vary the depth of the carve. And that will broaden or narrow the line accordingly. So that one tool, that spit sticker, produced this image here. This is an exercise in using one tool. So this is a feather, and essentially all the curves and the variable thickness line achieved with that one tool, the spit sticker. It's a very special thing, a feather, isn't it? I mean, there's an old tatty feather that's been rejected, molted by the bird, but it's still an object of beauty. And I think wood engraving is a bit like, not my own thoughts, but like visual poetry, really. You've got a limited amount of space and you want to get your ideas down, a bit like a poet has a limited number of words to use. And whereas a novelist and like a landscape painter can do a nice big expansive work, a wood engraver is tighter in terms of scale. That's why I do use lino for larger work. It's simply the material is more generous in scale, but it won't take the kind of detail that a wood engraving will take.
I guess the other difference with lino is you can layer print,
you can.
But with wood it's just all in one, is it?
Yes, I tend to do that. I mean, there are no rules. People can combine it with other things, multi-block printing, get different colours and register them very carefully. With wood engraving, I just stick with monochrome pictures, although sometimes I do tint them. So, for example, there's a tiny little picture there of a robin, and what I've done now, I just colorized it by watercolor paint. But on the whole, yeah, my work is monochrome, which I feel is shape and tone are often the things that make a picture work, and color is just an added extra.
It feels really appropriate that you should be doing something with such an ancient heritage in an ancient heritage building.
Well, I think, yes. I mean, I think we all have this old building, which was a mill. We've seen the industry of a lot of people working hard to make textiles. And of course, those days are gone, but a lot of studio artists operate from this building and get a lot of inspiration from the fact that, where we're positioned, the beautiful views outside, and just this feeling that, people toiled in here to make beautiful things and by human endeavour, human effort. And today we're kind of detached from that to some degree. We have objects that are created in places we don't really know. And it's quite with an open studio principle, coming in and watching this process gives a bit of life to it. It's a bit, my analogy is with music, we're bombarded with music, but we still crave live music. It's different. It has a different vibe and authenticity about it. And I like to think that, the creative work going on in the mill is similar. to that experience, that people see that it's actually made with great care and attention, and that gives it a unique quality. Okay, so I've got a very thin layer of ink on the roller. The roller is really important. It has to be extremely good quality to get a good, very fine film. And I just basically roll it onto the surface of the block. Slightly squeaky. And this block has been locked into the bed of the press. There you go. I'll put that down there. And this is a bit of paper I'm going to use for printing. I've dampened this paper to make it slightly more receptive for the ink. I'm going to place that over the block, and then just a bit of paper packing so we get the right amount of pressure. Close the press up. Now wind it in under the button of the press. I pull this handle, pause, and then let go. And then wind it out again. Open it up and we'll see whether you've got a satisfactory print or not. Which is the magic moment in printmaking. Peel it back. There we have a little wood engraving.
So mostly we've talked about wood engraving, but also I see that some of your large pieces are lino prints. Could you say a little bit about those and about the difference between them?
So lino it offers basically a very large piece of material. If you want to take it, it's a flooring material, you could go as big as your floor. Obviously there's a technical challenge of how you print that, but essentially for my purpose, I like to use lino for larger prints. Doesn't take the same amount of detail, but the images are bolder and it's the scale that appeals to me. And this is just regular lino, made for printmaking now. But it's a wonderful material. It was invented in Lancashire, and it's basically cork dust and linseed oil and a few other things. So it's kind of organic and it's not plastic, which is something we've been very mindful of now. And the contribution of microplastics in the environment is a worry. But this material is fantastic for using for printmaking, relief printmaking. And the process, because it's a softer material, you carve it deeper and you use chisels basically that cut further into the material, and I used a knife as well. But it does allow you to do really big prints. I tend to print on a roller press and an etching press if I'm using lino. But I can do scale like that, which would be a big challenge in wood engraving. I would have to use lots of pieces when joining them together, and that's really technically challenging and beyond my capability.
That attention to the detail there is still pretty amazing, to be honest. That's just fabulous.
This is the wood on the shores of Grasmere, called Dearbolt's Wood, and it's a magic place. I used to run there most mornings, and as the light comes up and shines through that wood, just for about 10 minutes, it is a place of absolute magical beauty. So it had to be a subject for a picture.
Thank you, Stuart, so much. It's been absolutely fascinating speaking with you. I've really enjoyed it, and I just adore your work. It's fabulous.
Well, thank you, Damien, for coming and allowing me to talk about something I feel very passionate about, and opening up to other people who probably see prints and wonder how they're achieved and how they're made. And the beauty of the open studio is that you can come in and watch me working, and I'd welcome anyone who visits Farfield to pop in and see me and see some of this work in action.